Hi everyone, it's Melissa Vincenti from Worldwide Migration Partners. I wanted to talk to you today about E3 extensions and or renewals. Now this time of year, due to the amount of travel back and forth to Australia, we get questions about how to renew E3s, whether it's 6 months out or 3 months out, so that it can coordinate with travel back to Australia or to other countries where there are consulates that you might be able to do an E3 appointment with. So today let's talk about the different ways you can renew your E3 or extend your E3 while you're in the US, and also in terms of how you might be able to accomplish that on your next visit to Australia. The first thing I want to mention, that always I mention this, is check your passport validity. This is important, especially if you've been in the US for a few years and you haven't traveled back to Australia. You may have neglected to look at when your passports are coming up for renewal. If they're less than 2 years to the expiration date, we do recommend that you get them renewed prior to doing an E3 renewal. Now double check your children's passports as well. Remember, they're only good for 5 years validity, and so oftentimes those will expire and you haven't even thought about it. So again, double check passport validities, go ahead and get them renewed if you need to. There is a mail-in process now for Aussie passports in the United States, not valid for children, but you may also want to get passports renewed on a trip back to Australia. As you know, it can take just a matter of a few days if you use expedited processing. So you might want to build that into your travel time in getting your E3s renewed back in Australia. The next thing I would like you all to do is, after this video, when you have time in the next short while, go ahead and check your I-94 validity. Remember, your I-94 is the entry document that you get that you can check online. Now that entry document is really important because that authorizes your stay in the United States. So it's not your visa, as many of you know. Your visa is merely just the knock on the door to get into the United States. So you have to always have a valid visa to return to the US or to enter for the first time. Once you do that entry, you are issued what's called an I-94 entry document. And that can be found online. You can either do a Google search, or we're happy to send you the link if you want us to send you the link. But I want to caution you to always check your I-94 at every entry. The reason being is sometimes there's mistakes made. It's natural, there's mistakes made. Sometimes people are only stamped for a very short amount of time for their valid entry. And so we can get those mistakes corrected if we have enough notice. And so always check your I-94 validity. The next thing you want to do in terms of your E3 renewal analysis is to check your LCA expiration. Now your LCA is your underlying work authorization. And so you want to make sure that that's valid along with your I-94, along with your visa. Those are the three things that we always want to check in terms of a renewal on your E3 status. And so your LCA, normally it's going to be around when you did your appointment or when you got your last renewed E3 visa. And so, but double check that to make sure that your LCA is not going to prematurely expire prior to your I-94 expiration or prior to your E3 visa expiration. So that's really important as well. Now let's talk about how can you renew your E3 visa and or extend your E3 status in the United States. The first way you can do that is by doing an onshore application to USCIS, and that merely will extend your E3 status for another 2 years. Sometimes this is really helpful if you can't leave the US and you can't get a new visa, and do it in a one-step process at a consulate or doing a mail-in process that we'll talk about shortly. The reason it's really helpful is because if you're really busy with work and or you want to coordinate with kids' holidays and E3 renewal, you want to make sure that your underlying E3 status is still valid. So if you're coming up against your I-94 expiration and or your visa expiration or your LCA expiration, I would advise you to think about if you need to do a USCIS extension of status rather than going abroad and doing a one-step application, getting a visa and your status extended at the same time. So this process can be a bit complicated, and so if you are contemplating and staying onshore in order to extend your E3 status, please be in touch with our team here at Worldwide Migration Partners so that we can walk you through what that might look like. There's a couple of things that are different when you're doing an extension through USCIS, and not always is that recommended for your process. And so we want to make sure that a USCIS extension is going to be right for you. Next, let's talk about E3 extensions and or getting an E3 visa renewed at a consulate or embassy abroad. This is the most popular way to extend your status or get a new E3 visa. And part of the reason is timing. A lot of times we will time an E3 renewal application at a consulate or embassy abroad when there's already travel planned to Australia or to another country, making it most convenient. Now, these applications are generally referred to as one-step applications because in essence, you are extending your E3 status if you've already had an E3 visa and getting a new E3 visa at the same time, which will be valid for 2 years. So this is really a good idea if you travel a lot and you always need a valid visa to travel on, and you don't want to be stuck out of the United States without having a valid visa to return. So we will coordinate with you looking at ahead a little bit on when your visa is going to expire. Usually we like to look out about 6 months and talk about travel plans, talk about family vacations and or school holidays. And we do try to work around those times so that it's not a special trip that you have to make back to Australia or to another country to get those new E3 visas in your passports. So the process being, as you know, you have to attend an appointment at a consulate abroad or do a mail-in application in Australia. So first, let's talk about the in-person appointment. At most consulates and embassies around the world, you are able to make an appointment as a third country national to get an E3 visa. However, having said that, certain consulates and certain embassies are more familiar with the E3 visa and therefore will have appointments available or will be able to do your visa application in a very streamlined fashion because they're familiar with this type of visa. Those consulates that we tend to use a lot of booking for our clients would be, for example, London, Madrid, Paris, Frankfurt, the Bahamas, Barbados, for example. Those are closer to the United States. Canada is a little bit out of the question at the moment. They're not really allowing regular appointments to be booked for E3 visa renewals. We haven't seen any movement with that for some time. Some people do have luck getting emergency appointments in Canada. I don't always recommend that because you don't always know that you're going to be granted an emergency appointment for just a regular renewal. So there may be other consulates also that might be appropriate for your E3 renewal. Check with us first before thinking about travel time or other travel itinerary going to other countries. So that's the first option, is to do an in-person appointment. Those are also available in Australia at Perth, Melbourne, Sydney. Those appointments usually are booking out about 30 to 45 days at the moment. That can constantly change. So we can see kind of fluctuations with the appointments and things like that. The advantage that you have with returning to Australia is if you're doing a renewal, you can do a mail-in process. So the mail-in process has been streamlined over the last couple of years. This is something that's always been available, but actually has been used a lot more during COVID times. And the consulate is trying to encourage applicants to be able to do E3 renewals through mail. And so they've tried to streamline their process a little bit. Turnaround time is about 2 weeks. And so you really need to plan on landing in Australia, sending the application off probably within the next day, and allowing at least 2 weeks to be able to get your passports back with the renewal visa attached to your passport. Can change sometimes a little bit faster, sometimes a little longer. So you have to be prepared to be able to change your flight if you need to spend a little bit longer time in Australia, or be able to go back earlier if you happen to get your visa back earlier. One of the things you have to look at, though, is if you have children that have grown a little bit older, and for example, on the first application, they were under the age of 14, but now, since being in the United States during the past 2 years, they've reached the age of 14, they are going to be required to have an actual appointment for their visa this time. And so sometimes our clients get caught out. They're not monitoring that. We don't monitor it on a regular basis when your child turns 14. But if your child has turned 14 since they received their first visa, we then have to book them an in-person visa appointment. And generally, we want that to be in Australia. So keep that in mind if you have children around that age. Once they've been fingerprinted once after the age of 14, then they also can participate in the mail-in process. So just keep that in mind. That's a little tip I wanted to give you all today. So the consular appointment, again, gives you some certainty because it's a one-step process. Once you have the visa, you have your E3 status extended, you return to the United States, and you'll be given a 2-year I-94 valid stay, and then you're okay for the next 2 years. So that's a good way to kind of have the visa aligned with the work authorization aligned with everything else. One other change that happened during COVID, which is a great change, is that E3 spouses are now given automatic work authorization. So some of you who have had E3s in the past and had dependents in the past know how difficult it was for us to juggle all of the E3 renewals along with getting a new EAD card for that person when the EAD cards were taking a really long time, and that caused some disruption in spouses and their ability to keep working in a streamlined fashion. Fortunately, that's now all gone away. As soon as you have your E3D status, you're able to enter and your work authorization is automatic, just like your spouse. So you're able to work right away, get your social security number if it's your first time. If you already have a social security number, you are able to work immediately. There is no more need for an EAD. Yes, that's lovely. It was one of those changes that we were super excited about. The other change that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention earlier is on a USCIS application. If you're doing an extension of status, and that is something that you want to do by staying onshore, there is premium processing now for those petitions. So whereas before, when we would do a USCIS petition, it could take months and months and months to get a decision, which caused, again, disruption with work authorization and otherwise. And so that is why we never recommended doing an extension onshore. We usually sent our clients offshore to get the one-step visa as well as their authorization to work and things like that. Now with premium processing, it's an additional $2,500 fee on the petition, but sometimes employers just want the certainty that the extension will happen within a 15-day period or thereabouts, and so they'll pay the premium processing fee to just tidy that up a little bit. So again, that's a little bit of a technical issue in terms of timing, and sometimes we use it when there's a change of employer because you want to start working for the new employer as soon as possible. So if that is your case, that you want to work for a new employer, you don't want to go get a new visa right away, but you do want to start working as soon as possible, reach out to us so that we can go through that analysis with you and decide whether premium processing is a good idea or not. Finally, I just want to say the process of renewing an E3 can be stressful. Mostly, I would say the stress comes around just finding the right time to do the renewal. It's not necessarily the process. The process is pretty similar to that of what you might have experienced on your first E3, either whether you're doing an appointment with the consulate or we end up doing a mail-in application. All of that is basically the same. The process comes around, the stressful part of it would be just coordinating the travel. So if you can plan ahead enough of the times, we will generally try to send you a reminder of when your E3 is going to have to be renewed. But if not, we just want you to mark in your calendar about 6 months out to your expiration date of your visa and be in touch with us again so we can walk you through that, have a quick call, find out if there's any changes to your employment, find out if there's any changes to your family, if you've had a baby, if not, those types of things, and so that we can advise you on the best way to accomplish that renewal. Remember, renewals are indefinite. You can continue getting renewals for as long as you need them. And the other thing I have to mention, I get this question a lot, is that an E3 doesn't directly result in a green card application. There are ways to go from an E3 to a green card application. And again, we're happy to talk about those types of options if that is something you have questions about. So on behalf of the entire Worldwide Migration team, we wish you all the best. We're happy you're in the U.S. on your E3, and we hope to make the E3 renewal process as seamless as possible. So reach out to us via email, phone, through our contact page, and we're happy to help at all times. Thank you.